You know that feeling when someone mentions the Soviet Union and your brain immediately goes to breadlines, propaganda, and economic collapse? Yeah, that's the expected reaction. But here's something nobody talks about. Buried inside one of history's most infamous economic failures were principles so sharp, so disciplined, that the people who actually understood the system used them to quietly thrive while everyone else stood in line. And the wild part? Those exact same principles are being used by the wealthiest people in the world today. They just don't tell you where the ideas came from. I'm Vladimir, and I translate the Soviet way of life to modern tactics to get better at life. Subscribe if you appreciate my views. Here's the thing about the Soviet Union that nobody talks about. It was a system designed from the ground up to make sure nobody got ahead. No private ownership, no individual wealth, no getting rich on your own terms. And yet, certain people inside that system figured out how to quietly thrive while everyone else struggled. Not by cheating the system, not by having the right last name, but by understanding two principles so fundamental that they work in literally any economic environment. And those same two principles are operating right now inside every major fortune being built today. The first one is collective leverage. In the Soviet system, nothing happened alone. If you needed something done, you didn't just go try to figure it out yourself. You knew someone who knew someone who knew someone else. Entire networks of people pooling what they had, combining skills, sharing access, making things happen together that none of them could have pulled off solo. Now take that same idea and drop it into modern wealth building. The wealthiest people you can think of are not lone geniuses working in isolation. They have partners, co-founders, joint ventures, and investment circles. They legally structure LLCs, cooperatives, and partnerships that let everyone involved benefit more than they ever would have alone. If you're out here trying to build something entirely by yourself, you're not being independent. You're just playing the hardest possible version of the game. The second principle is even more powerful, and honestly, it will change how you look at money permanently. It's resource control over resource ownership. Here's the Soviet paradox that makes this click. Nobody in that system technically owned anything, but the people who controlled access to resources, they lived like kings. And the modern translation of that is hiding in plain sight. You don't need to own the factory, you need to control how the product moves. Think licensing deals, think franchising, think intellectual property. You write one book and license it for decades. You build one system and franchise it across 100 locations. You create one patent and collect royalties while you sleep. You're not accumulating more stuff. You're building control over how stuff flows. That's where the real money actually lives. Put these two together and something interesting happens. While most people are grinding away chasing single income streams, the people who understand collective leverage and resource control are quietly stacking opportunities on top of each other. Not because they work harder, not because they understand how the game is actually structured. Now here's the principle that sounds the least exciting, but is probably responsible for more real wealth than anything else on this list. The Soviet Union ran on 5-year plans, not quarterly earnings calls, not monthly check-ins. 5 years, half a decade of committed, structured movement toward a single direction before anyone stopped to evaluate whether it was working. And before you write that off as some relic of authoritarian planning, think about how you've been approaching your own finances. Because if you're being honest, most people can barely commit to a financial strategy for 5 months before something shinier shows up and pulls their attention somewhere else. This is the pattern that quietly destroys more wealth-building potential than bad investments ever could. Jumping from side hustle to side hustle, rotating from stock to stock, chasing whatever ticker is trending this week. Abandoning a savings plan the moment it feels too slow. Every time you restart from zero, you're not just losing time. You're losing the compounding that was already starting to build underneath the surface. And compounding does not care about your intentions. It only rewards consistency. The boring, unglamorous, practically offensive version of this principle is also the most effective one in existence. Max out your retirement account every single year. Put your money in index funds and leave it there. Do not touch it. Do not check it every day. Do not panic when the market drops. Just let time do what time does. In 20 years, that strategy will have quietly outperformed the vast majority of people who spent those same 2 decades chasing hot tips and convincing themselves that this time they'd found the shortcut. Boring? Completely. Effective? Undeniably. The fourth principle hits even closer to home. Soviet citizens didn't have the luxury of waste. Every resource was stretched as far as it could possibly go because there simply wasn't another option. Now apply that same ruthless efficiency to your own money. Track where every dollar is actually going. Cancel the subscriptions you forgot you had. Stop paying a premium for convenience you don't genuinely need. And here's the reframe that matters. This isn't about being cheap. Cheap is a mindset of scarcity. This is about being efficient, which is a mindset of strategy. Because here's the truth that most people never sit with long enough. The majority of people don't have an income problem. They have a leakage problem. The money is coming in. It's just quietly disappearing through 100 small holes before it ever gets the chance to become something. Here's something the Soviets understood that most people building wealth today completely skip over. Yeah, before they built anything else, they built the infrastructure. Roads, railways, power grids, communication systems, the stuff that nothing else could run without. They didn't start producing and then figure out the logistics later. They built the rails first and then they put things on them. And if you look at why so many people make decent money but never actually build wealth, it almost always comes back to the same problem. They skipped the infrastructure. For your personal finances, the infrastructure isn't your income. It's your legal and financial framework. It's the foundation that everything else runs on. And most people never build it because it's not exciting, it doesn't feel urgent, and nobody's making YouTube videos about the thrill of setting up a proper business entity. But here's what's actually happening without it. Every dollar you make is exposed to taxes you didn't have to pay, to liability you didn't have to carry, to structural inefficiencies that quietly bleed your wealth before it ever gets the chance to compound. So what does building the infrastructure actually look like? It means setting up the right business structure for your situation, whether that's an LLC, an S-Corp, or something else entirely. It means having proper contracts in place so your agreements are protected. It means understanding tax law, not to evade anything, but to optimize everything you're legally entitled to. Contributing to tax-advantaged accounts, using legitimate deductions, structuring your income intelligently. These aren't loopholes. They're the rails that wealth runs on, and the people who build serious money aren't smarter than you. They just took the time to lay the rails down first. The sixth principle connects directly to this. The Soviet Union, whatever its failures, produced some of the most educated people on Earth. They treated education not as a personal expense, but as foundational infrastructure for the entire system. Do exactly the same thing with yourself. Every book you read on personal finance, every hour you spend understanding tax strategy, every course that teaches you how money actually moves within the law, that's not a cost. That is the single highest return investment available to you. Because knowledge compounds just like money does. The tax code alone is full of completely legal advantages that most people never use. Not because those advantages are hidden, but because learning requires time and effort, and most people would rather skip straight to the part where they're already wealthy. The infrastructure always comes first. That's not a Soviet idea, that's just how building anything that lasts actually works. Here's the irony that ties this entire thing together. The Soviet Union was a system where nobody owned shares, nobody held equity, and nobody built personal wealth through ownership. And yet, by stripping all of that away, the system accidentally revealed the single most powerful wealth-building principle in existence. Because when you watch what happens to people who have no ownership, no equity, no stake in what they're building, you understand immediately why ownership is everything. This is the end game. And everything that came before, the networks, the resource control, the patience, the efficiency, the infrastructure, the education, all of it was quietly building toward this one destination: equity. Owning things that keep paying you long after you've done the work. Think about what most people are actually doing with their financial lives. They trade time for money. They show up, they produce, they get paid, and then the cycle resets. The moment they stop showing up, the money stops too. And there's nothing wrong with that as a starting point. But it's a treadmill. You're always one step behind because the second you slow down, so does the income. The goal is to get off the treadmill entirely, or at least build something alongside it that doesn't require you to keep running. The paths to doing this legally are simpler than most people think. Negotiate equity in companies you help build instead of just taking the salary. Start a business where you own the asset, not just the job title. Buy property where every mortgage payment is quietly building something that belongs to you. These aren't complicated strategies reserved for people who already have money. They are decisions made deliberately to prioritize ownership over convenience. Build once, benefit repeatedly. That's the entire game explained in one sentence. And once that idea genuinely clicks, the way you evaluate every opportunity in your life shifts completely. You stop asking what something pays and start asking what something is worth over time. You stop looking for the highest hourly rate and start looking for the highest long-term stake. And here's what makes this principle the right one to end on. It's not a tactic. It's not a trick. It's a complete reorientation of how you see your own effort and your own time. The Soviet worker had no choice but to build for a system that never paid them back. You do have a choice. The question is whether you're building something that pays you back, or just running someone else's 5-year plan. None of this is secret. None of it is illegal. None of it requires you to exploit anyone or bend any rules. The Soviet Union collapsed, but the lessons it left behind about systems, patience, and structure, those are bulletproof. Strip out the ideology and what you're left with is a blueprint. Build your network. Control access. Think in years, not months. Cut the leaks. Lay your infrastructure. Invest in your own knowledge and own equity wherever you possibly can. Start with one. Just one. Because the person you'll be in 5 years is built entirely by the decisions you make right now. See you in the next video. Subscribe.